This is Uzi Baram and second part of the program looking at how to face the immense challenges of the COVID-19 crisis in Sarasota. The first part of the program looked at the history of Sarasota. We focused on the issues of racism and how Sarasota developed, and particularly some of the dynamics of segregation and, even more importantly, the forgetting that occurred in terms of the African American heritage of Sarasota. We're now going to move very clearly and pretty concisely into heritage as social action. And we start with what started coming together 5 years ago. First as the Newtown Historic Conservation District research and the report, but then how it got transformed into Newtown Alive, focused on courage, dignity, determination, a heritage movement. And central to that movement was Vicky Oldham and her vision and energy to reach into the past in order to enliven the future. And I think this is where we find how heritage can help us overcome the challenges and grow the resilience for this community. From Newtown Alive, we do hear about the paradoxes for the African American experience in Sarasota. On one hand, it was a self-reliant African American community tied together through education and religion and kinship, tremendous economic successes and opportunities, but within a context, as Carolyn Mason, who served on the Sarasota City Commission and then on the Sarasota County Commission, remembers, there was a dividing line, and that was Fruitville Road. African Americans could not go to Main Street after the sun set. They had to go northward to their homes in Overtown and Newtown. She even refers to it as a Mason-Dixon line. The Reverend Jerome Dupree, in this Newtown Live report, draws an analogy to apartheid South Africa. And as we saw earlier, we see that still today with the cemeteries, very different experiences in life and even in death for white versus black Sarasota. The energy, the insights, the hard truths come about through historic preservation. I mentioned in the first part of the program that in 1977, Sarasota wanted to look closely at its historical, architectural, and archaeological sites, but explicitly and seemingly shamelessly excluding Newtown. The balance to it came from a book, both for Your World and My World, but as the subtitle puts forward, a partial history of blacks in Sarasota County from the late 19th century to the mid-1980s. There was constant attempts to remember. Leonard Reed, one of the most important early members of the African American community and really one of the driving forces in Sarasota, his house was going to be demolished as Overtown became the Rosemary District. The decision was, no, that home where he raised his family, where educators grew up, was going to be saved, and it was moved. I took part in the survey of the Rosemary Cemetery, and shortly after that, Vicky Oldham, right, the one who really is the spearhead for Newtown Line, starts the project, the public anthropology program, Looking for Angola. Right, that's where we get that sense of the freedom-seeking people came out of her vision, that people will be interested in an archaeological endeavor. The survey of the Galilee Cemetery, and then Newtown, which had been just this kind of common sense of some place. The city erected two signs on 301 on Washington Boulevard. You see one in the photo here showing that this is where Newtown is. 2015, the Historic Conservation District proposed, and that research comes forward. We have Newtown Alive coming out of it. A series of his heritage interpretive signs are placed along a heritage trail at Newtown, and I'll say a little bit more about this, a rededication of the first Black community historic marker on Central Ave. Right, this is, and I want to make this clear, This is an impressive movement that's occurring that unleashes the heritage imagination, that provides uh, resilience for the community. The oral histories, the interviews, the archival research is bringing forward a tremendous amount of information of how people got through the struggles and oppression of segregation, the hard times of both the boom period and the Great Depression, the challenges of the Second World War, and the growth in the post-World War II period. And it comes about by remembering these people's lives and drawing strength from them. Newtown Alive, I've been really impressed. The trolley tours taking people throughout this area, an area of town which, as I started the program with, had been seen as dangerous, as almost mysterious, uh, silliness, right? That comes out of racism, comes out of generations of social practices of separation that started with government policies. The government policies are gone, but the legacies aren't. Going into the town, the area, and seeing the signage for the civic officials, for education, for the churches, for economic activity, and getting a sense of place both for visitors but also for residents to remember all those struggles. And as the one sign you see here, but replicated throughout, individuals, many of whom are still alive with us today, who can share what they went through. One of these examples, I was able in this fall of 2017 to have a course that allowed me to take students on a trolley, you can see in the photo there, to various historic and archaeological sites around Sarasota and Manatee counties. One of them was the Newtown tour with Vicki Oldham, and we stopped by the Wright Bush House, the family that came in the early 20th century, created a series of stores, and their home on MLK being one of the central community centers. When the students came, they saw the house needed some help. And in the spring, a series of students organized not just to paint the house, but really to talk about how important it is. And the community ate it up. There was tremendous numbers of media stories as new college students came into Newtown, helped out a family, made a house look a little nicer. It's all part of a historic preservation process that isn't just about the materiality, although archaeologically that's where we start, but the meaning of place and renewing that meaning in the present. Similar dynamics occurred at Lido Beach. The drive in the mid 1950s to desegregate the beaches of Sarasota was a first inkling of the success of the civil rights movement across the United States. Through the research by Newtown Alive, really through Vicki Oldham's energy, it was documented, it was recognized, and put on the U.S. Civil Rights Trail. And to honor that designation, a wonderful ceremony in January of 2019 occurred. Again, that trolley bringing people from Newtown, remembering that drive by those courageous individuals during segregation to come to the beach. It was recognized, and then, and you see here in the wheelchair, Glossy Atkins, who only recently passed away after more than 100 years of wonderful life. The joy of remembering and being remembered, that these are places imprinted with struggles and achievements and now being recognized. Yet another example that I really do want you to have a sense is these are just a few of them. The first Black community, as the sign says, was just north of downtown, known as Overtown. It's not recognizable today as Overtown. The Rosemary District rebranding frankly works. It now looks really different. Almost everything that had been is now gone and replaced with the new. The sign was first put up in 1985. It was removed as development occurred. It was feared that it would disappear and no memories would be there. But thanks to tremendous civic action, grassroots activism, it was retained. And in May of 2019, it was rededicated. You see the Oldham in a hat, Fred Atkins, whose work on the city commission was just instrumental in insisting on the remembrance of the past for the sake of the future, and John McCarthy, who also has done tremendous work to ensure that Sarasota does not turn its back on an important part of its history. And there is an emotional meaning. It's just a sign that you could drive past and not notice, but for many people, it is a tremendously meaningful symbol of what was and what could be. This energy is not just aimed at remembering, not just at nostalgia, but that progressive nostalgia is about opening up opportunities. On MLK in the heart of Newtown, there was a small building that had been a restaurant. It had closed down years ago, but there was that hope that Miss Susie's would reopen. As stumbling blocks, there are always stumbling blocks, but that urge to have a place we can go into Newtown and have the foods of the area and enjoy, and of course that provides jobs and opportunities and a reproduction of the social practices of what makes the place itself. These activities are coming together into creating a museum. And I do want to make it clear, museums matter. The International Council on Museums understand them as important places for dialogue about the past and about the future, to acknowledge and address conflicts. And right, nowhere in this program do I shy away from the evil of segregation, the fear of lynchings and the marching of the Klan that terrorized people. But they were never overwhelmed by it. They always were able, so many members of the community, to reach deep inside and create a future for their children and grandchildren, and really for us. And so this vision comes together as a museum, and that is moving forward as well for Newtown, but really for Sarasota and all of us. This notion of heritage, with its economic opportunities, with its celebration, with the tourism that brings people in, with its nostalgia and remembrances, still has to challenge the assumptions, right? To really push against the racism that separates us and them, that assumes something lesser in so many different ways that we need to shake out. But it's not just racism that overshadows the concerns about where the future might come about. We are working right now in the context of a pandemic, and the map for Sarasota and Manatee makes it clear that the hotspots are around Newtown. And so we need to think about how those legacies just haunt people today, the inequalities that lead to the hotspots being yet again in North Sarasota, not because of the people themselves, not because of racist, not to have the racist assumptions that it's about them, but how it is about us and the social structure that allows the inequalities to be reproduced and put peoples in harm's way. And there's even more of a challenge when hurricane season, and I've been concerned about how the Anthropocene landscapes are going to differentially affect people around this region. We look on a map and we see that in fact Newtown is in a basin. We look closely at the old soil surveys and see there are ponds throughout the area, all of which have been filled in. The elders talk about swimming in those ponds. They know where they were because that's where they were able to go while segregation occurred. Before their swimming pool, before they go to the beaches, they swam in these little swimming holes, in these ponds. They're buried, but one of the things we know is water always comes back. And we look and see the flood maps and know that we need to address how rising sea levels is going to differentially affect Newtown. Because of racial coastal formations, the marginalized groups are off of the coast, but they're actually in greater danger than the people on the coast because of the way the land is organized. We need to think about that, plan for it, not be surprised by the challenges, but have answers ready for how the community will grow and thrive even with these challenges. And as we think deeply about how heritage plays out and the history for the region, it's not unique. And again, the paradoxes. Just north of Newtown, just north of the Sarasota Bradenton Airport, is Talavast, a community that started in the early 20th century as a turpentine industry. A tremendously successful African American community, as the sign points out, a community once thought historical may soon be history, because part of its success was mid-20th century factories in the community that were part of, and this is so surprising, the nuclear weapons industry. Well, the parts that were made included nuclear materials, and the waste products were put into the water, into the ground. And Talavast, the small autonomous community, didn't have county water, so they were using well water, which had been contaminated. There's attempts to make sure things are possible for that community, but that pain is there. Talavast now has county water and sewage, but also heightened sense of cancer. On the other hand, in Manatee County, on the grounds of the State College of Florida, is the Family Heritage House Museum, dedicated to the African American families of the region and beyond. A beautiful little facility that's there for remembering some of the achievements of people in the region. We go south to Venice, and what had been the 1920s train depot is now a bus station. But even though this neo-Mediterranean architecture is quite beautiful, the two wings represent what had been segregation, that we have to be able to see this and remember that one area was for African Americans, one was for European Americans. It's no longer that way, but we can't avoid remembering some of that legacies that are still with us, even if they may not be obvious to everyone. And then back up in Bradenton, on the grounds of Reflections of Manatee by the Manatee Mineral Springs, the descendants from Angola, from that early 19th century Maroon community, have in the last 2 summers come back and celebrated on the land of their ancestors. Again, heritage as social action, as possibility, as strength. And what you see is a Bohemian Junkaroo band as part of the celebrations, tragedies, but also survival. So from this presentation, I hope you have a sense that one, there's a rich, robust heritage, one that's tremendously important. I particularly like this proverb, a tree with strong roots laughs at storms, right? The heritage provides those strong roots in the area, but it's full of discontinuities. Angola did not lead to Newtown. Newtown wasn't just always there. There's the story of Overtown. There's so many pieces there, and it's full of contradictions and paradoxes, right? From the burial of the Colsons in the Rosemary Cemetery to the seemingly good deeds of Charles Thompson. We just have to accept that nothing was simple. We do know that so much was erased, but a lot, and again, this is the archaeological metaphor, is being recovered, and it's being recovered for the strength of the community. So from this, hopefully you have a sense of the rich heritage in Sarasota and some of the future possibilities. Thank you so much for listening.